The annual Galactic Medical Conference held on Nexus had always been about as thrilling as observing bacteria multiply, and I should know I've done both. As the foremost expert in neurology from the Zent system, I, Dr. Xerax, have attended these meetings for the last 30 orbital cycles. Year after year, the same self-important doctors from across the galaxy gather to showcase their so-called groundbreaking discoveries, which usually turn out to be minor upgrades to existing treatments. But this year was different, and not just because someone finally swapped out the quantum coffee machine's filter after 30 years. It all began when I first noticed her at the opening ceremony. Amid the sea of tentacles, appendages, and various life-supporting devices, there stood a human. Humans at our medical conferences weren't exactly uncommon. They'd been part of the galactic medical community for about 5 years, but something about this particular one made my primary heart miss a beat and my secondary heart race to catch up. Dr. Elena Patel was like a supernova in the midst of a dark nebula. While the rest of us were dressed in our traditional medical robes, mine a particularly flattering shade of bioluminescent purple, if I may say so, she wore a human business suit. The stark white fabric stood in sharp contrast to her dark complexion, and her black hair was pulled back into what I would later learn was a practical ponytail. I watched as she maneuvered through the crowd, effortlessly avoiding stepping on Dr. K's trailing sensory tendrils, something even the most advanced of us, with our motion sensors, often failed to do. She moved with a confident, almost predatory grace, reminiscent of the apex hunters from my home planet. A fascinating specimen, don't you think? Dr. Yix Beta, my longtime colleague, appeared beside me, their crystalline form reflecting the surrounding light. I've heard she graduated at the top of her class from something called Johns Hopkins. Apparently, it's quite a prestigious institution on Earth. I adjusted my optical sensors, zooming in to observe her more closely. Another human doctor, how quaint. I'm sure they're still struggling to catch up with our medical advancements. How wrong I was, and how embarrassingly naive. If only I'd known then what Dr. Patel would do to challenge our entire understanding of galactic medicine. Dr. Patel approached the registration desk, where Administrator Block was in the midst of his usual meltdown, trying to manage the chaos. I could hear bits of their conversation even from a distance. "I'm sorry, but your credentials seem unusual," Block said, his translation matrix struggling to keep up with his frantic tentacle movements. "We typically require at least 3 centuries of practice for keynote speakers." Well, Dr. Patel replied with a smile that I would come to recognize as her signature one, somehow both professional and eerily unsettling. "I suppose you'll have to make do with my mere 3 decades of groundbreaking research in cross-species viral mutations." The way she said it, so calm and self-assured, sent a ripple of unease through my dermal layers. Here was a human, barely considered sentient by some of the galaxy's councils, acting as if she belonged among the medical elite. And the most infuriating part? She truly did belong, more than any of us could have ever predicted. I remember thinking, as I watched her deftly navigate Block's bureaucratic resistance, that humans were certainly an intriguing species. Their brief lifespans seemed to give them a strange blend of boldness and resolve. Little did I know, though, that this particular human was about to prove just how dangerous that combination could be. Dr. Xerax, her voice broke through my thoughts. Somehow, she had crossed the room unnoticed by me. "I've read your papers on neural pathway regeneration in silicon-based lifeforms. Fascinating work, though I have some questions about your control group selection." And there it was, that moment I should have realized something was off. A human not only grasping my research but scrutinizing it. I waved dismissively, fluttering my respiratory filters in a manner that would have deeply offended any Xenui physician. Dr. Patel merely grinned wider. The chaos began on the second day of the conference. In retrospect, the timing was almost comical. Just after Dr. VX delivered their mind-numbingly dull presentation about fungal growth patterns in zero gravity, the first case appeared at the Proxima Medical Center. A draconid trare began exhibiting symptoms that defied all conventional diagnosis. Their usually vibrant scales turned a dull gray, and their biochemical readings went haywire. Within hours, similar cases emerged across 3 sectors, completely unprecedented according to High Physician KNX, whose tentacles twisted in agitation. "We have reports of identical symptoms in 12 different species that should be genetically incapable of sharing any symptoms." KNX's voice trembled with distress. I watched the emergency council meeting unfold from my seat in the Grand Amphitheater. thermometer, the holographic display casting a web of red lines that connected the affected worlds. The number of cases was doubling every 6 hours. Perhaps, squeaked Dr. Yix Beta, their crystalline form clouded with unease, we should consider implementing galaxy-wide quarantine protocols. That suggestion stirred the expected outcry. A galaxy-wide quarantine had never been attempted in recorded history. The economic repercussions alone would have led to the collapse of multiple governments. Yet, Dr. Patel sat 3 rows ahead of me, her fingers furiously typing notes into her archaic tablet device. I noticed she kept pausing the surveillance footage, zooming in on what seemed like random details. The council has formed a task force, announced High Physician Knox, his voice thick with authority. Our finest minds will solve this crisis within days. Days turned into weeks. The quarantine measures failed miserably. The disease spread faster than our swiftest ships could travel. It made no sense. I recall the morning when everything changed. I was in the conference laboratory, analyzing yet another batch of unsuccessful treatment trials. My 4th set of arms was starting to ache from operating the quantum microscope for 12 hours straight. Your containment protocols are flawed. Dr. Patel's voice suddenly appeared beside me. I jumped, knocking over a tray of sample dishes. You're all approaching this from the wrong angle. Do you have a better theory? I tried to sound dismissive, but exhaustion made my words come out more desperate than I intended. She brought up her data tablet. Look at these transport manifests. Every single outbreak point received a shipment from the Centaur Medical Supply Corporation within 48 hours before the first case appeared. That's hardly surprising, I replied. They supply 60% of all medical equipment in the galaxy. Yes, but look at the dates, she said, tracing a pattern on the screen. All from the same facility, all within the same production cycle. My primary heart faltered. You can't possibly be suggesting the disease isn't spreading through contact, I said. Her gaze was piercing, glowing with that unnerving human intensity. It's being spread through sterilized medical supplies. Someone is using our own safety protocols as a weapon against us. I stared at her data. The correlation was flawless, too perfect to disregard. But the consequences, the council will never accept this, I murmured. Do you understand what you're implying? This would mean that someone within the highest levels of galactic medicine is intentionally causing this outbreak. Her lips curled into a grim smile. Yes, that's exactly what I'm implying. Impossible. The security protocols, the oversight committees. I trailed off, unable to fully form my thoughts. They can all be bypassed if you know the system well enough, she interrupted. Think about it, Dr. Xerax. What better way to ensure a disease spreads than through the very tools designed to prevent it? I sank into my support chair, my 6 arms going limp. She was right. It was chilling in its simplicity, and it made too much sense. The council is announcing their latest containment measure in an hour, she said, gathering her materials. It will fail just like all the others because they're fighting the wrong enemy. What do you intend to do? I asked. Her expression shifted into something that triggered every instinct in me to flee. I had seen that look before in historical footage of human warfare. I plan to prove it, she replied, and then I plan to stop it. Are you going to report me to the council? I asked. I glanced at the data again, then at the sample dishes containing tissue from the latest victims. I thought about my oath as a physician, not only to my species but to all sentient life. No, I finally said, but I want to know how I can help. Her smile returned, softer this time. Good, because I'm going to need someone who knows how to operate a quantum microscope with 6 arms. Have you ever seen a solar flare strike a planetary defense shield? The moment of impact creates a stunning light show, right before everything goes catastrophically wrong. That's exactly what happened when Dr. Patel presented her findings to the Galactic Medical Council. Preposterous. High Physician Knox's tentacles turned an alarming shade of ultraviolet. You dare claim that Centaur Medical Supply, a corporation that has served this galaxy for millennia, is deliberately spreading disease? Dr. Patel stood her ground, her small human form somehow filling the immense council chamber. The evidence is irrefutable. Every outbreak corresponds with this evidence. Dr. Yix Beta interrupted, their crystalline form vibrating with fury. You show us shipping manifests and production schedules. This is not evidence. This is desperation from a species barely out of their medical dark age. I watched from my observer's seat, my primary heart aching as they shredded her presentation. The worst part, she had been right about everything. We had covertly tested her theory in my lab over the past week. The contamination was there, cleverly hidden in the sterilization matrix itself. The council thanks you for your creative interpretation, High Physician Knox said dismissively. However, we will continue with our established containment protocols. As Dr. Patel exited the chamber, I noticed something strange strange about her expression. She didn't look defeated, she looked determined. "They'll never listen," I said, falling in step beside her in the corridor. "Good thing I don't need their permission to be right," she replied, not breaking her stride. "How do you feel about committing some light treason, Dr. Xerax?" All four of my hearts stopped momentarily. "What exactly are you planning?" She pulled me into an empty research pod, making sure the privacy shields were activated. "I need access to the main medical database, not the public archives. The restricted files, manufacturing records going back at least 50 cycles." "That is impossible," I said, my mind racing. "The security can be bypassed," she finished for me, "especially if someone with high-level clearance, say, a respected Zenari neurological expert, happens to leave their access terminal unlocked during their lunch break." I fluttered my respiratory filters nervously. "That would be a serious breach of protocol. More serious than letting millions die because we were too afraid to break some rules," she interrupted. "Have you ever had one of those moments when you realize your entire life has been leading to a single decision?" Looking at Dr. Patel's determined face, I had mine. "The database requires continuous biometric verification," I said slowly. "Even if you gained access, you would need—" "Oh, I need you," she confirmed, her voice unwavering. "Not just your access codes. I need your expertise, your knowledge of the system, and yes, your 6 arms to help process the data." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and secret research. We turned my private laboratory into a makeshift command center, running endless analyses. Dr. Patel worked with an intensity that both amazed and frightened me. She barely slept, sustained only by something called coffee, a stimulant that smelled divine but would likely dissolve my digestive tract. "Look at this," she said one night, projecting a hologram of the supply chain data. "The contamination started exactly 30 cycles ago, right when Centaur Medical Supply changed their sterilization process. But why?" I asked, all 6 arms occupied with different data streams. What could they possibly gain from causing a pandemic? "Follow the money," she muttered, a phrase I had come to appreciate from humans. Who profits when standard treatments fail? Who gets the emergency contracts for experimental cures? The answer made my scales ripple with horror. The subsidiary companies, all owned by the same board members at Centaur Medical Supply, she finished. They created a problem to sell the solution. Just then, a warning chime echoed through the lab. Someone was approaching. "Security scan," I hissed, quickly shutting down the holographic displays. "Hide!" Dr. Patel dove behind a supply cabinet just as Dr. Yix Beta entered, their crystalline form refracting the emergency lights. "Working late again, Xerax?" they asked, gesturing toward the multiple data screens. "The council is concerned about your recent withdrawal from official proceedings," I said, trying to keep my vocal sacs from trembling. "Simply pursuing an alternative line of research. The current protocols seem inadequate." "Indeed," they replied, moving closer to my workstation. "Strange readings from your lab lately. Power surges, unauthorized database access." My primary heart nearly stopped. "They know," I whispered to myself. "They value your contributions, Xerax," Dr. Yix Beta continued. "It would be unfortunate if your reputation were tarnished by associating with radical elements." After they left, Dr. Patel emerged from her hiding spot. "They are watching us," I said, panic making my scales flutter. "They will revoke my license, my status," I said, the weight of it sinking in. "They are letting people die to make a profit," she snapped. "Is your status worth more than that?" Looking at my screens full of casualty reports, the answer was clear. "No, but we need to be smarter about this," I said. "I have an idea." The next day, I made a very public display of leaving my laboratory. I made sure to let everyone know I was taking a much-needed rest period at the floating spas of Balgus. In reality, Dr. Patel and I moved our research to an abandoned medical storage facility on Nexus's 3rd moon. The authorities would focus on monitoring my usual spots, but nobody would think to check an outdated storage unit, especially one that, according to official records, had been destroyed in a waste management accident 3 cycles ago. The breakthrough came during our 15th consecutive night in the facility. Dr. Patel had been staring at genetic sequences for so long that her eyes were as red as a Martian sunset. "This makes no sense," she muttered, pacing between holographic displays. "The contamination is there. We can see it. But how does it survive the sterilization process? Even engineered pathogens should break down under quantum purification." I was only half listening, adjusting the microscope with my 3rd arm while my other limbs sifted through supply manifests. Then I saw it. "Dr. Patel," I called out, my voice shaking. "What does this look like to you?" She leaned over my shoulder, squinting at the molecular structure I had isolated. "That pattern, I've seen it before in your research papers," she said, her voice laced with recognition. "Yes," I whispered, my scales paling. "It's the same base structure we use in neural regeneration treatments, the standard practice across all major medical facilities. Her eyes widened in realization. The quantum sterilization isn't failing to kill the pathogen because it's not trying to kill it, she said, her voice tight with disbelief. The system recognizes it as beneficial medical nanites. They've disguised a virus as a healing agent. Dr. Patel grabbed her tablet, her fingers flying over the surface. Every hospital, every medical center in the galaxy uses quantum sterilization, and they all buy their equipment from Centaur Medical Supply. I felt sick to my core. We've been paying them to infect us. The next few hours were a blur of frantic documentation. We traced the modification patterns, proving how the virus disguised itself by mimicking standard medical nanites. Dr. Patel's human perspective was invaluable. She spotted patterns we had been conditioned to overlook. Look at the profit margin, she said, projecting financial records. Every time there's an outbreak, their subsidiary company stock values spike by exactly 47%. Not 46, not 48, always 47. They're not even trying to hide it. I realized they never thought anyone would question the standard medical procedures. Who would suspect the sterilization process itself? A human would, she grinned, that dangerous smile returning. We're notoriously suspicious of things that work too perfectly. We compiled everything: manufacturing records, financial transactions, genetic sequences, contamination patterns. The evidence was overwhelming, but we needed one more thing. We need a cure, Dr. Patel said, one that doesn't require their specialized treatments. I stared at her. That would take years of research. No, she smiled again, her expression becoming more unsettling. It will take one night because we already have it. She pulled up the original genetic sequence. The virus survives by pretending to be medical nanites, right? Dr. Patel asked. So what happens if we expose it to actual medical nanites? My respiratory filters fluttered as I understood. The real nanites would recognize it as an imposter and tear it apart at the molecular level. She nodded. We do not need to create a new cure. We just need to use the standard neural regeneration treatment in a way it was never intended. We tested it on a contaminated sample under the quantum microscope. We watched as real medical nanites swarmed the disguised virus, breaking it down into harmless components. The process took less than 3 minutes. Simple, Dr. Patel laughed. Sometimes the best solutions are hiding in plain sight. The council will never believe this, I said, but my hearts weren't in it. The evidence was too perfect, too complete. They will not have a choice, she replied, copying our findings to multiple secure data cores. Because we are not just going to show them the evidence. She handed me a sample container. Inside was a perfectly preserved portion of contaminated medical supplies taken directly from a Centaur Medical Supply shipment. We are going to show them how it works live, in front of the entire Galactic Medical Conference. Looking at the sample container, I felt something I hadn't experienced in cycles. Hope, but also fear. They will try to stop us, I warned. Dr. Patel's expression hardened. Let them try. I didn't spend 3 weeks in this storage closet eating emergency rations to give up now. Besides, she added with a grim smile, I think it's time the galaxy learned why humans have a reputation for being persistent. The data cores hummed quietly in the background as we prepared for what would either be the greatest medical revelation in galactic history or the end of both our careers, possibly both. The Grand Medical Assembly Hall buzzed with tension as Dr. Patel took the stage. I watched from the wings, all 6 of my arms clutching different data cores. Security drones hovered near the exits, twice the usual number. Thank you for convening this emergency session, Dr. Patel began, her voice steady. What I am about to present will change galactic medicine forever. My physician, KNX, shifted uncomfortably in their hover chair. We have already dismissed your theories, Dr. Patel. This session is a courtesy due to your government's diplomatic pressure. Not theories anymore, she replied, activating the main holographic display. Facts. Dr. Xerax, please bring the samples, she said. I moved forward, trying to ignore how the security drones tracked my every movement. The sealed container felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Stop! Dr. Yix Beta's crystalline form pulsed with alarm. That container is not approved for presentation. Security, confiscate it immediately. Interesting, Dr. Patel said, her tone unwavering as her guards approached. How did you know what was in this container, Dr. Yix Beta? I haven't shown it yet. The assembly hall went silent as she continued, her voice cutting through the quiet. You helped design it, did you not? Along with board members from Centaur Medical Supply, the guards hesitated, looking to High Physician Knox for direction. These accusations are outrageous. Knox's tentacles wavered. You dare suggest that council members are involved in creating and profiting from a manufactured health crisis? Dr. Patel pressed a button on her tablet. Every screen in the hall lit up with data. Yes, that is exactly what I am suggesting, Dr. Patel said, presenting the proof. The evidence flowed across the displays, financial records, genetic sequences, and manufacturing data. I watched the audience's reactions shift from confusion to shock, then to horror. The standard sterilization process, Dr. Patel explained, has been compromised for 30 cycles. The virus masquerades as medical nanites, allowing it to slip through security protocols. And who supplies these protocols? This is slander. Dr. Yix Beta moved to shut down the main display. Guards, remove her, Knox ordered. Try it, Dr. Patel said calmly. This presentation is being broadcast live to every medical facility in the galaxy. Attempting to silence me now will only prove my point. The guards hesitated, unsure. High Physician Knox's color had turned a sickly shade of green. But we have more than just evidence, Dr. Patel continued. We have a cure. Dr. Xerax. My hands trembled as I placed the sample container on the analysis pedestal. The quantum microscope hummed to life, projecting its view onto the massive screens. Watch carefully, Dr. Patel instructed the audience. Standard neural regeneration nanites, when properly programmed, recognize the virus as an imposter. Observe, the microscopic battle played out on the screens for all to see. Real medical nanites swarmed the disguised virus, tearing apart its carefully constructed facade. The audience gasped. No! Dr. Yix Beta lurched forward. You do not understand the implications. Oh, I understand perfectly. Dr. Patel's voice turned cold. This was never about profit, was it? This was about control. A galaxy dependent on your treatments, your supplies, your authority. High Physician Knox stood rigid, their tentacles frozen. Guards, end this presentation immediately, Knox shouted. This is a matter of galactic security. Security? Dr. Patel laughed, the sound echoing through the hall. Let's talk about security. Like how your private security force is funded by shell companies owned by Centaur Medical Supply, or how every member of the Medical Oversight Committee has received mysterious deposits from offshore accounts. The guards had not moved. Some were openly watching the financial data scroll across the screens. This human is clearly delusional, Knox sputtered. These accusations are documented, verified, and already in the hands of every major news network and government in the galaxy. Dr. Patel interrupted. I may be human, she added, but I am not stupid. Did you think I would confront you without taking precautions? She turned to address the stunned audience directly. The cure is simple. The treatment protocol has already been transmitted to every medical facility. Any doctor can administer it using standard equipment. The pandemic ends today. You have no authority. Dr. Yix Beta's crystalline form was practically vibrating with rage. The council came, a new voice said. The doors burst open, and federal investigators from a dozen species poured in. I recognized the insignia of at least 3 major government agencies. Dr. Patel smiled that terrifying smile one last time. Did I mention that my presentation was delayed by 10 minutes? Just long enough for certain authorities to verify my evidence and obtain arrest warrants. As I watched High Physician Knox and Dr. Yix Beta being led away in restraints, I realized that human smiles could mean many things. Sometimes they meant friendship, sometimes they meant triumph, and sometimes they meant that someone had just discovered why humans had a reputation for turning entire systems upside down when they found something worth fighting for. The aftermath of what the news networks dubbed the medical liberation spread across the galaxy like a supernova shockwave. Within days, every major hospital had implemented the cure. The pandemic that had baffled us for months vanished within weeks. I sat in my newly reinstated office at the Galactic Medical Center, watching the latest report scroll across my info screen. The investigation had uncovered corruption spanning centuries. Nearly half the medical council was facing criminal charges. Your tea, Dr. Xerax, Dr. Patel said, entering with 2 steaming cups. Though I still do not understand how you drink it through your respiratory filters. Some mysteries of xenobiology are better left unexplained, I replied, accepting the cup with my third right hand, much like how you humans consume that coffee substance without molecular restructuring.